Good afternoon. If you're coming here from the Informs Pride Community Kickoff, which was at noon today, welcome. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'm Michael Johnson, member of the Informs Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and chair of the Research Pathways Subcommittee, which is responsible for today's webinar. This subcommittee also organized last month's webinar on barriers to practice, the impact of anti-DEI laws on teaching and scholarship in OR and analytics. I'm joined by Dr. Jessie Talley, co-organizer of today's webinar, fellow DEIC member and assistant professor in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at Morgan State University. We're recording this webinar and we'll post it on YouTube on the Informs channel. Jessie, can you put the link to the first webinar in the chat?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. So today's webinar on the topic of DEI and scholarly publications will provide 3 distinguished scholars in OR and analytics with the opportunity to share their thoughts on how we can influence OR and analytics journals to engage with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and racial and social justice in creative ways. These include, but are not limited to, encouraging critical and inclusive approaches to scholarship on emerging and traditional topics, increasing participation by authors from traditionally underrepresented groups, and revising journal operations and strategy, including topic scope, review policies, distribution, and leadership. So our agenda consists of introducing the panelists, opening statements or presentations by each of the panelists, a moderated panel discussion, audience Q&A, and closing. And we welcome any questions or comments in the chat. And during the audience Q&A, Jess and I will do our best to recognize raised hands as well.
Yes.
So I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists, and the full biographies are available on the event description page. Jessie, can you put the link to the description page in the chat? So I'd like to start with Margaret Bion-Dortier. Margaret, I hope I didn't murder your name too badly.
No, it was pretty good.
Margaret is an associate professor of management science and statistics at the Robert H. Smith School of Business, University of Maryland, College Park. Dr. Bion-Dortier's research focuses on data-informed decision-making, combining traditional operations research approaches with machine learning. In addition to serving on multiple journal editorial boards, she is co-editor of the special issue of Informs Transactions on Education, devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Bion-Dortier is founder of Pay Analytics, providing a pay equity platform to organizations around the world. She holds a BS degree in mechanical and industrial engineering from the University of Iceland and a PhD in operations research from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Jessie, would you like to introduce Gemma?
Gemma, yes. Next we have Jenna Banajer, who is an associate professor and a Ramon Y. Cajal fellow at Universidad Carlos III de Madrid. She received her PhD in operations research at the University of California, Berkeley. And her major research topics are nonprofit supply chain management, sustainable and socially responsible operations, and supply chain design. She serves as senior editor at Palm Journal and is on the editorial review board of the Decision Sciences Journal. Professor Banajer serves as the president of the Public Sector Operations Research Section at Informs and is the vice president Europe at Palms.
Thanks, Jessie. Last of our panelists is Christopher Tang, University Distinguished Professor and the holder of the Edward W. Carter Chair in Business Administration at the UCLA Anderson School of Management. He serves as the Informs Vice President of Publications and Senior Associate Dean of Global Initiatives at the UCLA Anderson School. He's also served as Editor-in-Chief of Manufacturing and Service Operations Management, Dean of the National University of Singapore Business School, and President of the Production and Operations Management Society. Margaret, Gemma, and Christopher, welcome.
Yes.
We'd like now to turn it over to Chrysophilis Vogetsis, member of the Informs DEI Committee, who will tell us a bit about the committee's mission, goals, and recent activities. Chris, are you there?
I'm here. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jesse, for organizing this, and thanks to the panelists for taking the time to, present to us and offer some of their invaluable expertise and experiences with us. So I'm very proud of the work that is happening here. I'm very proud of the efforts that the DEIC has been coordinating through Michael and Jesse here. So the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is a committee within Informs, and Ahita Hojandi is serving as the chair. I have the honor of serving as the vice chair, and then Michael is the Research Pathways Subcommittee chair. So before I get to describing really quickly what the DEIC does and what our goals are, I want to thank some of our sponsors, including the University of Michigan, Industrial and Operations Engineering Department, the University of Minnesota, Industrial and Systems Engineering Department, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, University of Tennessee Knoxville, and Harvey Mudd College. And I just want to thank them for their supports. Informs has a direct link to diversity, equity, and inclusion within their strategic plan. Actually, if you search for the strategic plan of Informs, you'll see that there is a goal of advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in all we do. And this is what the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is trying to do. That said, within Informs, work at diversity, equity, and inclusion is decentralized. So we have subdivision groups, including MSOM, PSOR, that were mentioned earlier, Minority Issues Forum, that has been a leader in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in Informs for years. The Junior Faculty Interest Group, or Women in Operations, Research, and Management Sciences, WORMS. So a lot of the work that is happening within Informs is decentralized, and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee serves at bringing all these diverse communities together and working towards making a dent, making an improvement in our status as a leader organization of operations, research, and management sciences. The committee was first created as a standing committee in 2017. 2023 marks the first year where the committee was required to get its own funding and has been supporting itself. Its organization is in terms of subcommittees, including the Research Pathways, that is organizing the event here, Teaching Pathways, which is a similar endeavor that is focusing more in pedagogy, inclusive pedagogy, and diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom, community building, practice, and last but not least, the Ambassadors Program. So our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Ambassadors Program has funded 40 projects roughly in the last 4 years, started with 8 projects in 2020 and has grown to 10 projects in 2023. I'm going to put the link to the Ambassadors Program. And thank you so much, Priyank. Of course, the Pride Forum was an Ambassadors Program earlier on, and we are very, very happy and proud that it has grown to become a newly created community in Informs. So I put the link to the Ambassadors Program in the chat for those of you that are interested in getting more information about it. It is essentially smaller projects that have the direct goal of improving DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in one aspect within Informs. The Research Pathways also last year organized the first Student Paper Award that is continuing this year. So we are really excited and really looking forward to seeing what happens in that. Generally, the people that are participating in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee are not DEI experts. We don't have all the answers, but we are people that are trying to facilitate DEI-focused activities and create synergies within all these different communities that we said before, in order to, in the end of the day, promote best practices, promote templates, improve language in the things that we do, improve the way that we build committees and awards and so on. So if you have an idea of how the DEIC can serve you or can help promote an event, can help support your activities, please feel free to reach out to me or Anahita or Michael and Jesse, of course, that are organizing this event. And again, we're very thankful. And last but not least, I'm going to put a link to a conscious and unconscious bias video that Informs produced and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee has helped promote. So if you haven't watched it, I think it's an excellent use of your time. If you've watched it, then it doesn't hurt if you promote it to other people within Informs or other collaborators in operations, research, and the management sciences. Okay, hopefully it didn't take too much time, but I gave you a good enough introduction into what the DEIC aims to do. Thanks again for organizing this. And yeah, I look forward to the event. I look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much for all that information. And it reminds me that besides the resources that we've already put in the chat, there are many others as well that we'd like to share with you. Susan Martinosi has an article in the 2022 August issue of ORMS Today on DEI in the classroom. There's a piece by one of our Informs diversity ambassadors, Margaret Brando, an examination of diversity and Informs journal editorial boards, and more. So these links, along with any slides that our presenters may share today, we'll be sure to send to all of you after the presentation. So I'd like now to turn it over to our panelists. We now have an opportunity for each of them to discuss any aspect of their experiences in scholarly publications that are relevant to the webinar. And if it's okay, we'll start with Gemma, then Margaret, and then Chris. So Gemma first.
Thank you so much for having me here and having the opportunity of sharing with you my thoughts and enjoying the time with you in general. So I would like to start. I don't know how much time I have, like initially maybe 2-3 minutes. I'm just, since I'm the first with starting the topic, I want to reflect on something that kind of when I was invited as my first thought, which is we want to improve DEI in the publishing. There's different ways. Basically, I can think of the topics being more diverse, having more diversity and talking about equity and inclusion. But we also can work on DEI with respect to the authors of these articles that are being published. So, and these are not, they could be thought as separated, but they are also interconnected with each other. And thinking about DEI as diversity, equity, and inclusion, reflecting with my research, my notion is that this DEI is maybe a new keyword that is being used lately, but I think that we have done work related to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our field already, but we not necessarily use this keyword. For instance, the notion of equity, we have been studying equity for a long time. We have been using equity as a word. Inequity, we have been using the Gini coefficient, the notion of fairness, the notion of price of fairness, the notion of vulnerability, and we have been studying it with adapting it to, or using it for topics related to supply chain design, vehicle routing, location decisions, vaccine distribution, and so on. Then think about social justice. There's work going on right now, not with the keyword DEI, but there has been work in humanitarian logistics, urban planning, refugee resettlement, lately human trafficking. My work related to nonprofit operations has also aspects to do with equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I think it's also a matter of how we frame what we do, and maybe we could revisit some of the work that is already published, and it could be also classified as DEI in that respect. Then looking at authorships and how can we improve the diversity within the authorship pool, I have a lot of ideas. I don't know, maybe I can just wait for that aspect, because I think it's a systemic problem. It doesn't start with authors. There's the reviewers, the editors. There's a lot of things that we can work on with the objective of having more diversity in this pool of authors that are being able to publish in for journals. So I will stop here and let the next panelist speak.
Thanks, Gemma. Margaret?
Sure. Yeah, so thank you, Gemma, for kind of setting the stage so well. I'm very glad that Chris said earlier that, you know, those of us who are working with the DEIC, we don't have all the answers. So this will just be my 2 cents to add to the conversation, because I definitely don't have all the answers. But just to give you a little bit about my background and how I ended up here, and why I think maybe us as a community, we are in a great position to address many of the challenges of DEI. My research path that kind of led me onto this panel, I believe, is my work in pay equity. And so it really started as a solution to a very concrete problem. So a COO was trying to close their pay gap, but there was no one who could tell him how to close it. So everybody could measure a pay gap, but when it came to actually making the decisions of, okay, we have an 8% pay gap, how do we close it? You know, nobody could answer that question. And to me, that sounded like a dream OR problem, right? Because you have a problem, you need to make decisions, then how do we optimize them? So we developed all the theoretical work around that, and kind of reflecting on my own publication journey, it was very hard to find home for that work, because it was very orthogonal to anything that had been done before. So that paper actually is one of my favorite papers, and it ended up nicely at Org Science after being, for example, rejected at MS, etc. And then thankfully, my second paper on the topic did get published at POMS, and that was an easier write, but that was maybe 3 years later, and this had become a little bit more mainstream to be addressing these topics. So maybe that's, you know, I think that will kind of lead nicely into the conversation that we are going to have about diversity of topics. How do we, you know, open our doors to new topics? Because I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of challenging problems, and we as a field, we do have the tools to support good decision making. So ensuring that those types of papers then have a place within our journals, I think, is critical, and can also just highlight the contribution and what we can do as a field. So I think I will pause there and hand it over to Chris.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Gemma. And thank you for Michael and Jesse for organizing this session. It's really well appreciated. Well, instead of going back to the point of origin, I look at the panel people joining it here. I'm probably the oldest one. I have been an eForms member for 40 years. And so basically, my background is similar to Michael, starting with mathematics. So then the question is that eForms is actually the foundation was based on OR and management science. So most of the tradition speaking, these are the mathematicians and industrial engineering and OR people. So there from the beginning, I think the social issues was not on the radar screen. Now, including myself, my identity did not play a role in my earlier career. But then as I get older, I realized that we're limited time on Earth. Is that what we're going to do to help companies to increase profits or reducing costs? So I think that is to say, well, at the end of the day, do we want to make a difference to the society? That was the starting point for me to think about socially responsible operations to expand the objective function from just pure profit to include sustainability, equity, and inclusion, that kind of objective. So that was my point of origin. Then I discovered that was a challenge because it's a new context. So that the question is what should we do as a community to include some of the interesting contexts that we must deal with, the society problems. So I just finished attending a wonderful webinar organized by Priyan and DY on the Pride Forum. So I think that there are a lot of issues that are similar, that I think that this DEI committee can also do more outreach to get more allies, to identify a group of societal problems that our informed community can address. Now, I can assure you that is the informed sport, the informed journal, the editors, and they are actually looking for this type of work. But then the question is, how can we actually get through the system? So we'll come back to that later. So I think that we need to actually think about how we can engage a broader community such that we can get this kind of broader context into the mix without focusing on just purely on the mathematical and analytical techniques. So I think that requires some kind of change in mindset. We'll come back to that later. Now, for myself, I have served I have the privilege to serve as DEI ambassador. So I have work with Ting Long Dai with 3 panels discussions. One is on race, the other one on gender, the third one on LGBTQ issues. So I have the privilege to interact with many of you, and I look forward to listen to your advice as well. I stop here. Thank you.
Michael, you're not.
Yep. Thanks. So thanks, Chris. And so Jesse, you and I have opportunity to lead a discussion with the panelists. Would you like to start with a question?
Sure. I'll start with how can we transition from special issues in which non-traditional topics and approaches are encouraged, and there is understood to be a higher probability of acceptance, to standard issues in which more traditional norms and lower acceptance rates apply, which may be to the detriment of DEI themed research?
I can take the first comment. So I think I would remark the importance of special issues before moving beyond special issues.
Yes.
I think it's very important because they are a new opportunity to work with new problems, but also to invite new editors and also to invite new reviewers. And these new editors and new reviewers this is the kind of the first opportunity for some of them. First opportunity to work with the journal, to show how serious they are with their work, how professional they can work, and then eventually become part of that editorial board. So I think special issues are really really important. And an idea related to special issues that I don't see in our field a lot is to have special issues with other journals from other areas. For instance, related to DEI, maybe a journal specializing in human resource journal that does work with teams or how to mix different profiles of different people or different races, different genders, or a journal that is specialized in global healthcare or public policy. This sort of type of special issues that are a little bit beyond that specific journal. That would be my initial comment.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. Margaret or Chris?
Margaret, you start first.
Sure. No, I mean, I think thinking about the journals as an organization, I think the tone has to be set by the editor-in-chief. And then the expectations trickle down from there. So I've been on, I guess, privileged enough to be a part of different journals, and the tone and what is important, I mean, is communicated from the top. So when your question was, how do we move from special issues into, making this, part of what we do, it's about creating departments within the journals where DEI issues are part of what they do, for example. It's about emphasizing to the organization, meaning the editorial boards, about the importance of societal problems, and if needed, not, do we need different measurements on when we evaluate those papers from what, Chris was referring to, let's just maximize profit and be done. Often when we deal with fairness and societal issues and inequities, the measurement piece is harder and murkier, and so then do we need to evaluate that differently from when we are just measuring everything in concrete dollars, for example. So I think, not to kind of discourage anyone, I think the tone is set by the editors-in-chiefs, and I think that's the key of giving these topics, more weight within these journals. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Margaret. Well, let me start with the premises first. After Michael invited me to serve in this panel, so I wrote a paper on DEI. So it was I was very grateful to Decision Science. They accepted, but through that one, I tried to highlight some of the topics, the challenges and opportunities for doing DEI research. Now, but by doing that, I discovered DEI is rather nebulous. It's not that well defined, not that easy to measure. Now, in a scientific field, that is a challenge. That is actually applied to the notion of ESG as well, because ESG is also very controversial. Now, Jesse, right now, I think the PALMS, the journal, actually the first one tried to have a special issue in DEI is a good starting point. Now, because PALM was more willing to take risks, but some informed journal editors may be less risk-taking. So that is depending on the journal editors. That's what Margaret said. Now, but I'm wondering, instead of calling it DEI, maybe we think about DEI is about addressing societal problems. Then it would pivot the issues in terms of using DEI as an umbrella. Under this umbrella, there are many society challenges we need to confront with. Now, if we position it that way, we don't need a special issue. These topics need to be addressed by researchers and by others. So let me give you a couple of examples, all right? So for example, gender pay gap and race pay gap, and also including the LGBT pay gap, they exist. We need data, we need analysis, we need intervention. What kind of intervention could make a difference? And I vaguely remember Lamar Pierce has a paper on that in terms of pay transparency. So he studied how the university disclosed the salary in the public universities that would trigger to reduce the pay transfer, the gender pay gap, right? Now, that kind of work is not about DEI per se, because DEI is too broad. In terms of gender pay gap, you can do that. And then using pay transparency is a mechanism, is an intervention. Then you can actually do data analysis as an experiment, right? Now, that kind of work, it would be published by all these top journals, even if not Informs, could be in Economics Journal, no problem. The other example, it would be in terms of fair housing issues that Michael Johnson's study, also in terms of equitable access to food bank with different ethnic groups. And Julie Ivey has a fantastic study on that. So in the case, instead of just labeling DEI because it's not well defined, so the reviewers, they get very nervous because they're not sure how to evaluate, how to judge. So instead of doing that, because a single paper cannot solve the DEI problem, it's too big, it's like the world hunger. So why not we dissect it to focus on a specific societal problems? So one could be talk about gender pay gap. So I'm doing some work on female board representation of a company, how it affects other companies, right? So in that case, we collect data. Now, but this kind of work may be acceptable in informed journals, maybe not. But I think that is, if with more of us to do these kind of societal problems, we can make our community become better. Then after we done all this, then we can compile this work to showcase it. This is part of our DEI efforts. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I wanted to follow up on one of the comments about whether there could be different standards for DEI-related submissions. And I just wanted to highlight that in a number of applied social science fields, there have been long-going conversations about how to measure and value the work that uses particular analytic methods, participatory action research, community-based participatory research. And so in other professions as well as OR, the question of how to value different approaches is one that other people have been dealing with. I just wanted to put that out there. So I have another question for the panelists, and this has to do with increasing participation by authors from traditionally underrepresented groups. So we know that the numbers for underrepresented groups and informs are pretty low. How can we encourage meaningful collaboration in authorship, increase participation from members of underrepresented groups in authorship, and avoid some strategic activities like co-author shopping or symbolic co-authorship? How can we encourage more engagement by underrepresented groups among the authors?
I mean, I will start if we follow the same order. Anyways, I wanted to describe some action items that I think could be good for improving authorship, diversity in authorship, that are still related to journals and the reviewing process. I think there could be, in general, reporting. Reporting is a nice way of nudging, right? Without being forcing for anything. Reporting the statistics related to diversity. I don't know if this is something, maybe I don't know yet, but whether the reporting of the statistics about diversity is happening for journals, for informal journals, and the reporting on the diversity of the authors too. I don't know if this is happening systematically every year, or just the fact that we have this information and it's out there and we can actually compare between different journals. It's good. Information is important, and it's also sometimes put some pressure into some journals. Then I have other comment related to maybe having a shorter tenure for certain editor positions, just to have more people, newer editors participating, having this opportunity. So increasing the opportunities by shortening tenures, or another idea that I have, I don't know if it's feasible, would be to have, I don't know, maybe this exists, maybe Chris can tell me whether there exists, because I see like very respected profiles that have they participate in a lot or multiple editorial boards for multiple journals. So they are senior editors, associate editors, department editors in multiple inform journals, which maybe there could be some sort of a rule that maybe you can participate in a maximum of 2, just to again to extend the opportunity of doing this activity to other people, in increasing in this way the diversity and reducing the bias to them, and just having more people, more different people participate into the editorial roles.
Thanks, Gemma. Margaret or Chris?
Margaret first.
I'm going to kind of ignore a little bit the questions about the authors and leave that to Chris, and kind of just add 2 cents to what Gemma was talking about access to these opportunities. And I really liked what you were saying, Gemma, on what we don't measure, we can't manage, right? Collecting these statistics. So one thing that I have, just reflecting on how I do my own work within the journals, is that I tend to rely on kind of the same set of AEs that I trust And then if I'm looking for reviewers, it's the same set of people that I know that will do quality job and are in my network kind of thing. And I think that's part of the problem. I mean, I think I'm part of the problem is that our own networks are very narrow and we need a way to broaden them. So what are the right strategies to broaden these networks? So one thing, one idea is, because we're throwing out ideas and this could be a bad idea, and then you just shoot me down, but would be when, you know, editors identify high quality papers that are being published. And as we know, kind of the way into an AE or a DE is through, you know, reviewers, is to, you know, create a list of, you know, quality authors as a potential good reviewers. If I am, as a DE, would have access to, here are people that have done quality work that I could reach out to, it would be a way for me to widen my network very easily. So I think, so that's one thing, just to try to operationalize, you know, creating more opportunity, because right now it's very much, at least where I'm working, very ad hoc. And you want quality reviews for the papers that you're in charge of. So I'm very, it's also a reflection of me because I'm very risk averse, right? Because, you know, these are important decisions. This can, you know, affect people's careers, whether their papers get accepted or not. So it's not, you're not risk seeking with your choices of reviewers or AEs. So that's just one way to kind of think about, you know, how do we operationalize kind of opening up these reviewer opportunities so that we then have, you know, more and a wide, broader range of people for, you know, potential AEs, etc. Down the line. So that's just one more idea of thinking about how do we broaden access to opportunities. And then I think just to add one more thought is also holding yourself accountable. So one of the things that I am doing right now is I'm chairing the DEI Best Student Paper Competition, co-chairing that. And we literally, when we were inviting people or begging people to take part in, you know, reviewing and judging all of those papers, so to serve as judges in that competition, we had a spreadsheet that had gender, our best guess of race. We didn't have sexual orientation, but we had, you know, geographical location, and we tried to be as diverse as we possibly could. So that's also, I think, yes, we need to operationalize how we do things so that we can do them better, but we also then need to also just hold ourselves accountable to do better. So then I will leave the hard question about authors to you, Chris.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Gemma. First of all, I want to address Michael's question first. Initially, it's about co-authorship. First, I would like to declare that for the last 20 years, 80% of my co-authors, they're all female because they do the work and I get the right. Okay, so, but I really enjoy working with them. Secondly, I want to share with you, Gemma and the audience, that Informs has really done a lot in terms of transparencies. First of all, now virtually all journals, they provide a list of the demographics of the editorial board members. So for example, I prepared the slides, but I'm not going to share with you because in real time. So for management science, actually, we for in terms of the demographics, is looking quite good. I can share with you statistics. For the editorial board, 21% are female, and also that in terms of with 1% Black or African American on the editorial board, Latino is 5%. All right, so that is actually surprising. It was a very perfect match of our Informs membership. So bear in mind, we also need to get from the pool of Inform members because we want the editorial board members to be Informs members, to be fair, right? So basically, right now, our Informs society, including student membership, we have around 1% of Blacks or African American, which we need to grow, obviously. And we have 5% Hispanics and Latinos. Then the bulk is really mixed between, is still male dominated. That's the truth. And also that in terms of the demographics, is shifting from the white population to the Asian population. All right. So that actually there are more Asians representation and informs as a society. Now, so we do provide all the statistics and breakdown, but we have not done for the authors demographics. Now, that one, let's hope that we can provide that kind of information later on. Now, then the second one, in terms of diversity of the board, I can share with you with the audience because it's very important for them to know about the efforts that informs a board, informs publication committees, and we try to ensure that we are supporting this effort as well. First, let me describe the EIC, the search committee. The committee, not the EIC, not the editor. For the EIC committee, we want to ensure the membership is actually have a fair representation. We do have diversity. So what normally do in this case would be like, I nominate the committee, but then the board has to approve it to make sure that it is such. And also, I also get Michael, who's serving on the publication committee, to get their support as well. So we want to have a fair representation on the committee first. Then we'll also try to monitor the way the process, make sure that it's inclusion, make sure that the cast a wider net. So in the case, they have the committee, the search committee will recommend the candidates, and then the publication committee, like Michael Johnson is part of it, and myself, and also we vote on that. Then once we agree, then we submit our nominees to the board for their approval as well. So in the case, there is a process put in place to ensure some kind of fair representation and also the process. Now, secondly, we also want to make sure you know that after the EIC is appointed, there's an orientation program. So we want to make sure they are aware of the commitments and also how informs take the DEI efforts seriously. Next one is about Gemma's question about the editorial board diversity. Besides the transparencies, we also have the rotation policy. Now, each EIC, because each term is 3 years, they cannot reappoint more than 50% of the existing board members. So, for example, management science with a new editor, I just had a one-on-one meeting with him yesterday. It's basically that he's going to rotate out more than 50% of the DEs. All right. So in that case, it's not him. So in that case, it's less political. So he can just rotate out 50%. But I cannot really micromanage. It's up to them how to figure it out. Then also that is, they also need to submit the rotation about the associate editor every year to the to us, and also we'll share that with the board. So in the case, we are taking this seriously. Make sure that the rotation now. But the challenge is the editorial board members across all journals. Now, that is very difficult because some of them is beyond informs. So informs, we can some say, but then beyond informs, like a POM, like other journals, it could be difficult because of the domain. Now, let me come back to the reviewers. I think that Margaret has a very good point, and Gemma has a very good point. It's human nature. You only ask the people you know to do the job. So if you start with small group, then this kind of bias will persist. So to change that, how do we do that? Now, but then there's a problem. By definition, minorities are invisible. Asians are invisible, LGBTQ people are invisible, non-white people are invisible. But that can change. So one idea that I have been talking with Matt is trying to come up with maybe a database for people who are willing to serve, but then they have to do a good job. So to have a list of reviewers outside the traditional domain. Then we'll ask the editorial board to select some of them from this pool. Now, we also need to monitor the progress, the performance of the reviewers. Do they do a good job in terms of quality of the reviews, the review cycle time? Are they being conscientious, responsible? Then if we can track the statistics, then we try to find some way to keep track of these statistics that will create a pathway as a potential candidates, if they do a good job, to be an AE, right? Because right now, we don't have data. When you don't have data, then what do? You only ask the people you know, right? So I think that that can change, but I think that we need to take steps, but I think that that is in the work that I'm thinking how to operationalize it. Now, Jeremy and Margaret, this is easy said than done because we have to deal with Scholar One. Scholar One is like talking to God. It's not easy, all right? So there are a lot of restrictions and also the financial implications as well. But trust me, I want to make the change, but there are a lot of restrictions. It's a constraint optimization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Jesse, would you like to open it up to questions from the audience?
Sure. If you have a question, you can either drop it in the chat or you can raise your hand if you have any for our panelists.
I guess I have a question. This is Elena Gersman with Executive Director of Informs. I love this conversation, so thank you. In terms of when you're thinking about ideal state, what would that look like for each of you? And maybe not the complete ideal state, but what are you like looking at when you're like, okay, Informs has made a lot of progress, not just a little, but what would it look like? Of your feedback.
I can get started. So we have not talked about the geographical aspect. I think Informs is very US centric. I don't know what the goal is. If it wants to remain North American centric, or if it wants to expand more, and that could be also one of the aspects that is a minority, right? I feel like a minority because I live in Spain. For instance, it's harder for me to attend the annual conference. There's certain things that, and if it's harder for me that I'm a faculty member, I cannot imagine that students or anyone who is in other places in the world beyond Europe, right? Like it's kind of it's harder to engage if you are not in the North American region. So I don't know if this is something that has been discussed within DEI or it's an aspect that is kind of not pressuring or priority or a priority. Some ideas could be to have, like EMSOM, to have this annual conference 2 years in North America, the third year outside North America. The annual conference, I think it's a big, it's a big thing, it's a big idea, but that's, it's just an idea.
Okay, I have one question in the chat and then I'll get to Lamar next after this question. So someone in the chat asks, as a PhD student who will be on the job market in the near future, is there a risk to protecting myself? Sorry, it kind of moved up. As a candidate who is strongly interested in DEI research, given the crackdown on DEI initiatives in various states?
Let me take this question then. I don't think it matters because I can assure you that Informs, I think academics are much more liberal than the general public. And actually, as I mentioned before, if you focus on certain societal problems, it's actually all journals are welcoming this kind of work as well. But then, of course, the analysis need to be vigorous to meet certain standards. But I think that I will encourage this student to follow her passion.
I love it. Lamar, would you like to ask your question next?
Yeah, I just wanted to, sorry, this is the horrible thing where you say, this is more of a comment than a question, but I want to reiterate what everybody said here and say, how on point it is. And just, as an example of someone who took over in January as editor-in-chief, it really does all start at the top. And, with us, it started with the search committee, which was all women except one person who is an underrepresented minority. And so it was important. They made sure that they picked somebody who really fundamentally cared about this. And then, you have to come in and you have to appoint the editorial board. And you need to make sure that you get there. And I want to reiterate a few things on this. One is that geography is a really important dimension, and it's a really important dimension in terms of inclusion across the world and feelings of inclusion. Because org science certainly had a reputation as being North American centric. I think when I took over, there were only 3 editors outside North America. And ours is still too low, but I think we're at 12 or 13 now. There are only 30%, women. So I think, or I'll just say non-male. And that gets us, we're up near 50%. But I'll tell you the one area that has been a real struggle for me. I've had very little problem getting a large number of Latina or LGBTQ scholars as editors. I've had tremendous problems getting Black scholars as editors. And when I was sitting down, I spent 3 or 4 months getting my editor list all recruited and everything. I set down a list of about 20 people who were Black scholars that I wanted to have as editors, and all but one of them said no. And I think there are a couple of really important points on why this is, because it gets back to what you guys have been saying about the pipeline, which is at least with all the people I talk to, as soon as people get tenure, they get asked to do everything. And nearly all of them were, if they weren't the associate dean of DEI, they were the associate dean or director of something else. And so the challenge was not about finding a bunch of great editors. The problem was that they were overloaded. And in fact, one of the ones that I was able to recruit, she was able to do it because her dean thought it was so prestigious that he was allowed her to give up her associate dean position. But what we're thinking about very carefully in this is what you guys had talked about, this long pipeline. How do we start with scholars when they're in graduate school, when they're assistant professors, building folks and giving them opportunities and experiences to ultimately become editors? And I think that has to start well before they become tenured, because then it gives the opportunity to really commit to that and hopefully stave off getting asked to do other things. but I'll say one last thing, which is about the networks. One of the reasons I focus so much on getting the editors right is that, like people said, when you have a diverse set of editors, which again, we still have work to do on, it attracts a diverse set of authors. It diversifies the reviewer pool. And it makes a big difference in all of those types of signals. Of course, I'm fortunate to be in a field where we actually publish quite a bit on this topic, and it's really core to our identity. But I really do think it all starts at the top. And I like the policies that Chris has been implementing, because I think they're really sort of pushing us to think about this carefully from the EIC search all the way down. I'll be quiet.
Priyan, I hope I said that correctly.
Yeah, that was absolutely correct. Thank you so much. Actually, I think Lamar kind of gave me a way to ease into my question. So I was going to say that I've attended several of these sessions in the last few years, and I end up seeing probably the same folks on the panel and same folk in the audience. Very rarely see more people joining in, and I would like to see, like I chair DI track for DSI POM, I end up seeing the same 10 people, same 15 people. And as Lamar was saying, is how, like, you could ask me to be a reviewer, you could ask me to the president of Pride Forum, you could ask me to be this panelist, but at some point there is a limit to the 24 hours I have. So in that regard, I wanted to ask that it cannot essentially be the work of the minorities to become editors and all. Like, it is more about inclusion from the editors, because the statistics of Informs show who the majority of the folks are. So I wanted to ask that if it's a systemic thing, then what kind of accountability, what kind of procedures are there which will put the onus on probably the editors, on the A's, on SEs, that we have to make it a more inclusive field, because it can't be put on the minorities that they're not enough of you, or many of you are working hard and you're not able to contribute. So what sort of things can be put in place that put the onus on the top leadership? And we have many leaders here from Informs and others. So it's just a curious thought. I don't know what the answer is, but I wanted to say it from a junior's perspective.
So thank you, Priyank. So Jesse, I wanted to jump in and remind us that our panelists and all of you have been so generous with your time. And I wanted to give the panelists just a minute if they have any final or closing remarks, and also to thank all of you for your questions and comments. Panelists, anything that you'd like to say?
Gemma, you start first.
I think the idea of operationalizing DEI in our processes at Informs is very important. And I will ask Margaret to share with the rest of sections at Informs this way of selecting reviewers that you have implemented, because as president of public sector, we have been discussing that how should we increase the diversity in our review process, and this affects the awards, this gives the prestige, so it's very important as well to kind of visit these processes, internal processes that Informs that we have with respect to awards, and not only the regular editorial and publishing processes. Thank you. I just want to say thank you all.
Thanks, Gemma. Margaret?
Sure. Yeah, I think it starts with these conversations, and I think we're always trying to improve, and there's, we're dealing with the same problems as any organization that wants to do better. And I don't think there's any silver bullet that will make things better overnight, but it's about doing things better, improving and keeping ourselves accountable. Yeah, just by describing out loud, how I do my own reviewer selections, now I'm like, okay, I need to do better. So I need to, so even just from this forum, I will, revisit how I, do my things. And I think, having the conversation, listening to the concerns, I mean, at least that's the start. And now I will hand it over to Chris to say these things way more eloquently.
No, thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Gemma. Well, I've been with Informs for 40 years. And I can tell you, as a student in 1982, today's panel and then the Pride Forum was unimaginable. Because 40 years ago, if you're non-white, if you're not straight, if you're not white, you don't exist. It's really invisible. But today, I see the progress. We're not there yet. But I think that this kind of conversation is tremendously helpful. Also, I think come back to Priyank's work, I think that actually people are willing to help, but they don't know how. So I think that we need to have allyship and friendship. This is what I suggest to Worms 2 years ago to Dorothy Hon. At that time, it's always me. I go to minority group, I go to the Asian group, I go to Worms and all this. I said, oh, it's always the same person. I said, this has become a support group. It's not going to go anywhere. I said, why not buy one, get one free? I asked all the Worms members to bring a male members to come to the meeting so that they understand the issue. And then we can ask them, how can you help us to move there? It makes a big difference. So I think for the DEI, again, the same people, because I've been asked to serve from so many DEI panels, so many discussions, I run out of time. So I think that we need to engage, we invite other people to form as allies, to support us, to understand us, to understand where we're coming from. I think that will make a big impact. So I think that the Pride Forum is doing that. I hope that the DEI Forum would do the same. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Gemma and Margaret. Jesse and I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon. We're so appreciative to our distinguished panelists for sharing their thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion and scholarly publishing in operations research and analytics. We hope that some of what we discussed today can be useful for you in your research, practice, teaching, and service. And if you have any comments and suggestions or feedback from this event, we want to hear from you. So you're welcome to contact Jesse and me, or Anahita Kojandi, who is president of the Informs Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. or Gina Lloyd, who is the DEIC liaison to the Informs Office and Chief Human Resources Officer. I want to give a special thanks to Dwight Roy, who preceded me as chair of the Research Pathways Subcommittee and inspired me to do these webinars. So thanks to all of you. Jesse?
Yes, thank you all for attending. Thank you to our panelists for being so gracious and being with us today. And we hope to see you at the next webinar that we host.
Good afternoon. Thank you.